Alex Carter had always been a man of simple pleasures. He lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, freshly painted fences, and flower beds bursting with color. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, or at least by face, and where weekends were spent mowing lawns or hosting barbecues. But Alex wasn't like most of his neighbors. He didn't care much for small talk or community events. What he cared about was his privacy. His home sat on the edge of the neighborhood, tucked away behind a tall wooden fence that shielded him from prying eyes. Inside that fence was Alex's sanctuary, a world entirely his own. There was the vegetable garden he tended to every morning, rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs thriving under his watchful eye. In one corner stood an old shed, weathered but sturdy, filled with tools and spare parts for the vintage cars he loved restoring. And then there was the garage, his pride and joy, where engines roared back to life under his skilled hands. For years, Alex's life unfolded peacefully within those four walls. His days followed a comforting rhythm. Wake up early, drink a cup of strong coffee, tinker with whatever project awaited him in the garage, and end the evening watching the sunset from his back porch. Neighbors often joked that Alex's house looked more like a mechanic's workshop than a family home, but they left him alone. After all, he kept to himself, paid his dues on time, and never caused trouble. But nothing stays peaceful forever. One day, a crisp envelope appeared in Alex's mailbox. It bore the logo of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a group Alex barely paid attention to. Curious, he opened it and scanned the contents. The letter outlined new rules designed to enhance neighborhood aesthetics. Among them were requirements to remove any structures deemed unsightly, including sheds older than 10 years, and to trim bushes so they didn't exceed 3 feet in height. Attached was a checklist of violations specific to Alex's property. Apparently, his beloved shed was too shabby, his garden too wild, and even his fence, his precious barrier against the outside world, was now considered outdated. At first, Alex laughed it off. Who cared what some committee thought? He certainly didn't. But as weeks passed, more letters arrived, each one firmer than the last. Then came fines, small at first, then larger when he ignored them. Alex tried to brush it aside, telling himself it was just bureaucracy gone mad. But deep down, unease began to creep in. These weren't just suggestions, they were demands, and if he didn't comply, the consequences would only escalate. What Alex didn't realize yet was that this was just the beginning. The HOA officers, led by a woman named Barbara Thompson, were not people who took no for an answer. They saw Alex's refusal as a challenge to their authority, a crack in the carefully maintained facade of order they worked so hard to preserve. Little did Alex know, his quiet life was about to be turned upside down. And soon, he'd have to decide how far he was willing to go to protect the only place he truly felt at home. As the weeks went by, the tension between Alex and the HOA began to grow like a storm cloud on the horizon. At first, it seemed manageable, just another minor inconvenience in an otherwise peaceful life. But Barbara Thompson, the head of the HOA, wasn't someone who let things slide. She prided herself on running a tight ship, ensuring that every house in the neighborhood adhered to the rules she believed kept property values high and the community looking pristine. To her, Alex's refusal to comply wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a threat to everything she stood for. Barbara wasn't alone in her mission. She had a small team of HOA officers who shared her vision, or at least followed her orders without question. Together, they devised a strategy to deal with Alex. They started with polite reminders, sending letters written in formal language that urged him to address the violations on his property. When those went unanswered, they escalated to phone calls. Alex ignored them all, letting the voicemails pile up while he tinkered in his garage or tended to his garden. Each ignored message only fueled Barbara's frustration. But Barbara wasn't one to give up easily. If anything, resistance made her dig in her heels even harder. She called emergency meetings with the HOA board, presenting Alex's case as if it were a matter of utmost urgency. If we don't take action, she argued during one such meeting, others will follow his example. Before you know it, this neighborhood will look like a junkyard. Her words struck a chord with some members, who nodded in agreement. Others sat quietly, unsure whether Alex's shed and overgrown bushes really warranted such drama. Still, no one dared challenge Barbara when she was in full steam. Determined to make an example out of Alex, Barbara decided to step up their efforts. Flyers appeared on his front door, printed in bold letters. Attention resident. Your property is non-compliant. The flyers listed every violation in painstaking detail, from the height of his bushes to the condition of his fence. It ended with a stern warning. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in legal action. Alex found them one morning when he stepped outside to water his plants. He stared at the papers for a moment, then crumpled them up and tossed them into the trash bin. What Barbara didn't realize was that her tactics were having the opposite effect. Instead of intimidating Alex into submission, they only strengthened his resolve. Every letter, every call, every flyer felt like an invasion of his personal space. He couldn't understand why anyone cared so much about how tall his bushes grew, or whether his shed had a fresh coat of paint. To him, these were trivial matters compared to the freedom to live as he pleased. And yet, Barbara seemed determined to turn his life upside down over something so insignificant. The final straw came when Barbara organized a public meeting to discuss Alex's non-compliance. She invited everyone in the neighborhood except Alex himself, framing the issue as a collective problem that needed solving. During the meeting, she painted him as a stubborn troublemaker who refused to play by the rules. Some neighbors nodded along, agreeing that Alex's yard didn't quite fit in with the rest of the neighborhood. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether the situation warranted such hostility. Either way, the meeting left Alex feeling betrayed, not because people sided with Barbara, but because they allowed themselves to be swayed by her rhetoric without hearing his side of the story. By now, Alex was seething. He tried to tell himself it didn't matter what others thought, but the constant pressure wore on him. His once peaceful sanctuary felt under siege. Every knock on the door made him tense, wondering if it was another notice or another neighbor dropping by to lecture him. For the first time in years, Alex felt trapped, not by physical barriers, but by the weight of expectations imposed on him by people who barely knew him. Something inside him snapped. He realized that ignoring the problem wasn't going to make it go away. If Barbara and her team wanted a fight, they were going to get one. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Alex's quiet world was shattered once again. He had just finished brewing his usual pot of strong coffee and stepped outside to enjoy the calm before starting his day. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass from a neighbor's yard. For a brief moment, everything felt normal, peaceful, even, but that illusion was short-lived. As Alex walked toward his garden shed to grab some tools, he noticed something unusual. Movement. Beyond the tall wooden fence that surrounded his property, he spotted shadows shifting near the gate. At first, he thought it might be kids playing or maybe a stray animal wandering too close. But as he moved closer, his heart sank. There they were, the HOA officers. 3 of them stood in his yard, clipboards in hand, inspecting his property like detectives at a crime scene. Alex froze for a second, disbelief washing over him. How had they gotten inside? His fence was tall and secure, or so he thought. A quick glance revealed the truth. They had climbed over it, using a ladder leaned against the side. They hadn't bothered to knock, call ahead, or ask permission. To them, it seemed, rules didn't apply when it came to enforcing their own. "What are you doing here?" Alex demanded, his voice sharp with anger. He strode across the yard, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The officers turned to face him, startled by his sudden appearance, but quickly regaining their composure. Barbara Thompson, ever the picture of authority, stepped forward. "We're conducting an official assessment," she said matter-of-factly, her tone dripping with condescension. She gestured to the clipboard in her hands as if it were some kind of badge granting her unlimited access. "Your property is non-compliant, Mr. Carter. We need to document the violations." "Document what?" Alex shot back, his fists clenched at his sides. "This is my land. You can't just barge in whenever you feel like it." Barbara raised an eyebrow, unfazed by his outburst. "According to HOA bylaws, we have the right to inspect properties for compliance purposes. You've been notified multiple times, and since you haven't taken action, we're within our rights to proceed." Her words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. These people actually thought they could invade his space without so much as a warning. His sanctuary, the one place where he felt safe and in control, was being trampled upon, treated like public property. The other two officers busied themselves jotting notes on their clipboards, ignoring the tension brewing between Alex and Barbara. One of them pointed to the old shed, muttering something about its dilapidated condition. Another circled around the garden, snapping photos of the overgrown bushes. It was as though they didn't see Alex standing there, seething with rage. "This ends now," Alex growled, stepping directly into Barbara's path. "Get off my property. Right now." Barbara crossed her arms, meeting his glare with steely determination. "Mr. Carter, I suggest you cooperate. If you continue to resist, this will only escalate further." "You think I'm afraid of escalation?" Alex snapped. "You climb my fence without permission. That's trespassing. Don't test me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The standoff crackled with unspoken threats, each side refusing to back down. Finally, Barbara gave a curt nod to her team, signaling them to wrap things up. As they gathered their equipment and headed toward the gate, Barbara paused and looked back at Alex. "This isn't over," she said coldly. "If you won't clean up your act, we'll do it for you. And trust me, you won't like how that goes." With that, she climbed back over the fence, leaving Alex alone in his yard. But the damage was done. His blood boiled as he watched them leave, their intrusion leaving behind a trail of frustration and violated boundaries. Something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about a shed or some bushes anymore. It was personal. Alex knew one thing for certain. They wouldn't catch him off guard again. The moment the HOA officers disappeared over the fence, Alex felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. His hands were still clenched into fists, his chest rising and falling with each angry breath. He stood there for a few seconds, staring at the spot where Barbara had climbed out, replaying her parting words in his mind. Asterisk. This isn't over. Asterisk. No, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Alex's thoughts raced as he paced back and forth in his yard. The audacity of those people, invading his property, treating it like it belonged to them, was infuriating. But what really stung was their confidence, the way they acted as if they had every right to do whatever they pleased. They weren't just targeting his shed or his bushes. They were challenging his autonomy, his ability to live life on his own terms. And Alex wasn't about to let them win. He stormed into his garage, his mind already forming a plan. This wasn't the first time he'd faced adversity, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Over the years, Alex had learned how to solve problems with his hands and his wits. Now he would put those skills to use defending what was rightfully his. The first thing he did was grab a crowbar and some planks of wood from the corner of the garage. He carried them outside and began reinforcing his fence, hammering nails with sharp, deliberate strikes. Every blow echoed through the quiet morning air, a physical release for the anger building inside him. He added extra layers of plywood along the bottom of the fence, making it harder for anyone to climb over. Then he dragged an old metal barrel to one side of the gate and filled it with heavy stones, creating a makeshift barrier that would require serious effort to move. But Alex didn't stop there. He knew Barbara and her team wouldn't give up easily. If they wanted to come back, he needed more than just physical obstacles. He needed a warning system. Rifling through his collection of spare car parts, he found exactly what he needed: wires, speakers, and an old car horn. With these, he rigged together a loud alarm designed to go off whenever someone crossed onto his property. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. The quick test sent a deafening honk reverberating through the neighborhood, startling a flock of birds into flight. Satisfied, Alex set the trigger near the gate. Next, he turned his attention to his garden tools. Picking up a sledgehammer, he tested its weight in his hands. It wasn't something he planned to use lightly, but having it nearby gave him a sense of security, a reminder that he was prepared to protect himself if push came to shove. He leaned it against the wall of the shed, close enough to grab in an instant. As he worked, Alex's mind drifted to the bigger picture. What he was doing might seem extreme to some people, but to him, it was necessary. Those officers had crossed a line, and now he was drawing one of his own. This wasn't just about keeping them out. It was about sending a message. His property wasn't just land or structures. It was his home, his refuge, the place where he felt most alive. No amount of rules or threats could change that. By the time he finished, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across his fortified yard. Alex stood back and surveyed his handiwork. The fence looked stronger than ever. The alarm was ready to blare at the slightest intrusion, and the sledgehammer sat waiting, a silent guardian. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Alex felt a flicker of calm. Whatever came next, he was ready. Little did he know, the HOA wasn't done either. Their next move would bring the conflict to a boiling point, forcing Alex to decide just how far he was willing to go to defend his sanctuary. The week passed in an uneasy calm, but Alex knew it wouldn't last. He could feel it in the air, a tension that lingered like the quiet before a storm. Every time he stepped outside, his eyes instinctively scanned the fence line, half expecting to see shadows moving on the other side. The neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, early one Friday morning, the storm arrived. Alex was in his garage, tightening bolts on an old engine he'd been restoring, when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of voices outside his gate. At first, he thought it might be kids playing or neighbors chatting as they walked by. But then came the metallic clang of tools hitting the ground and the scrape of boots against gravel. His stomach tightened. Grabbing the sledgehammer from its spot near the shed, he moved cautiously toward the gate. Peering through a gap in the fence, Alex's jaw clenched. There they were, Barbara Thompson and her team, accompanied this time by two burly contractors carrying saws and crowbars. They weren't here for another inspection. This time, they meant business. "Mr. Carter," Barbara called out, her voice sharp and commanding. "We've given you plenty of chances to comply. Since you've refused, we're taking matters into our own hands. Step aside, or we'll remove you ourselves." Alex didn't respond. Instead, he watched silently as one of the contractors tried to push open the gate. When it wouldn't budge, thanks to the barrel Alex had placed behind it, the man cursed under his breath and began climbing over the fence. That was when Alex made his move. Stepping into view, Alex swung the sledgehammer down hard onto the wooden planks blocking the gate. The impact sent splinters flying, startling the group. "I told you," he said, his voice low and steady, "you're not coming in here." Barbara's face turned red with fury. "You can't stop us, Alex. This is ridiculous." Ridiculous. Alex almost laughed. Was it ridiculous to stand up for your home? To refuse to let people trample all over your life because they didn't like how your shed looked? No. What was ridiculous was their arrogance, the way they thought they could march onto his property and take whatever they wanted. When one of the contractors attempted to climb further over the fence, Alex planted himself directly beneath him. Holding the sledgehammer firmly, he swung it close to the man's feet, not to hurt him, but to make his point clear. The contractor yelped and scrambled backward, nearly falling off the fence in his haste to retreat. "You're insane," Barbara shouted, pointing at Alex. "Do you realize what you're doing? You're destroying property, assaulting people." "I'm protecting my property," Alex shot back, his voice rising. "And I haven't touched anyone. But if you keep trying to come in here, that's going to change." For a moment, no one moved. The standoff crackled with tension, each side waiting to see who would blink first. Finally, Barbara gestured sharply to her team. "Fine. We'll leave for now. But mark my words, Alex, this isn't over. You'll regret this." As they retreated, dragging their tools behind them, Alex felt a mix of triumph and exhaustion wash over him. He had won this round, but he knew it wasn't truly over. Barbara wouldn't let this go. She'd escalate things, bring in lawyers, maybe even involve the police. But none of that mattered right now. All that mattered was that his home was still standing, still safe. For the rest of the day, Alex stayed alert, keeping an ear out for any sign of their return. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his yard, he allowed himself a small smile. Whatever happened next, he'd proven something important, not just to Barbara, but to himself. His sanctuary was worth fighting for, and he wasn't afraid to fight dirty if he had to. The confrontation at Alex's gate didn't stay hidden for long. By midday, word of the standoff had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance suddenly appeared on sidewalks and driveways, whispering behind cupped hands or casting curious glances toward Alex's fortified fence. Some were outraged by what they'd heard. How could anyone act so aggressively against the HOA? Others quietly admired Alex's boldness, seeing him as a symbol of resistance against rules that felt increasingly intrusive. Barbara wasted no time escalating the situation. That same afternoon, she filed a formal complaint with local authorities, accusing Alex of vandalism, obstruction, and even threatening behavior. Within hours, 2 police officers arrived at his door, their expressions unreadable as they asked him to step outside for questioning. Alex complied, knowing there was no point in resisting. As he stood in his driveway answering their questions, he noticed Barbara watching smugly from across the street, arms crossed and lips curled into a satisfied smirk. Alex was arrested later that evening, not because he had committed any serious crime, but because the HOA had enough influence to make his actions look worse than they were. The charges were minor, mostly related to property damage caused by dismantling parts of his own fence. Still, being handcuffed and led to a patrol car in front of his neighbors stung more than Alex cared to admit. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, exposed to the judgment of people who barely knew him. The trial came quickly, drawing attention not just from the neighborhood, but also from local media outlets eager for a sensational story. Headlines blared phrases like "homeowner versus HOA" and "property rights showdown," turning Alex's private battle into public spectacle. During the proceedings, Barbara took the stand, painting Alex as a reckless troublemaker who refused to follow basic community standards. Her testimony was polished, rehearsed, and designed to sway the judge, and it almost worked. But Alex wasn't without allies. Several neighbors testified on his behalf, describing how the HOA's rules often felt excessive and arbitrary. One elderly woman recounted how she'd been fined for planting flowers deemed non-compliant. Another man spoke about the pressure to replace his perfectly functional mailbox because it didn't match the HOA-approved design. Their stories painted a different picture, one of an organization more concerned with control than fairness. When it was Alex's turn to speak, he stood calmly before the court, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "This isn't about a shed or some bushes," he began. "It's about respect for my home, my privacy, and my right to live life on my own terms. They climbed my fence without permission. They tried to take something that belongs to me. I wasn't going to let them." His words struck a chord with the judge, who ultimately ruled in Alex's favor. While acknowledging that his methods may have been extreme, The judge concluded that the HOA's actions, including entering his property without consent, were equally unreasonable. The fines against Alex were dropped, and the HOA was ordered to cover legal costs. News of the verdict sent ripples through the community. Some residents cheered openly, celebrating Alex's victory as a win for individual rights. Others grumbled, claiming the ruling set a dangerous precedent. But regardless of personal opinions, one thing was clear. Alex Carter had become a legend of sorts, a man willing to stand up to authority when pushed too far. In the days that followed, Alex returned to his routine, though nothing felt quite the same. His once private sanctuary was now the center of attention, dissected and debated by strangers online and offline. Yet amidst the chaos, Alex found solace in knowing he'd fought for what mattered most. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he faced them with renewed determination and a reinforced sense of pride in the home he had defended. In the weeks following the trial, life in the neighborhood began to shift, subtly at first, then more noticeably. Alex's victory over the HOA sent a ripple effect through the community, sparking conversations that had long been suppressed. Neighbors who had quietly resented the HOA's strict rules found courage in Alex's defiance. Slowly but surely, people started questioning the organization's authority, pushing back against fines and regulations they once accepted without complaint. For Alex, things were different too, but not entirely how he'd expected. His name had become synonymous with resistance, and while some neighbors treated him like a local hero, others still viewed him as a troublemaker. He received nods of respect from those who admired his stand, but also icy stares from those who thought he'd gone too far. Despite the mixed reactions, Alex felt a strange sense of peace. For years, he'd lived in relative isolation, content to keep to himself. Now, whether he liked it or not, he was part of something bigger, a movement toward reclaiming personal freedom. Determined to move forward, Alex decided to rebuild not just his fence, but his entire approach to living in the neighborhood. Using leftover materials from his workshop, he constructed a new barrier around his property, stronger and taller than before. This time, he painted it bright red, a bold choice meant to send a clear message. This was his space, and no one would dictate how it looked or functioned. The vibrant color drew curious glances from passersby, but Alex didn't care. It was his way of reclaiming control after months of tension. Inside the fence, Alex focused on restoring normalcy to his life. He returned to tending his garden, pruning the very bushes the HOA had deemed unsightly. With each snip of the shears, he reminded himself why he loved his sanctuary so much. It wasn't about perfection. It was about creating something uniquely his own. In the garage, he dove into new projects, channeling his energy into restoring an old motorcycle he picked up at a flea market. The rhythmic hum of tools and engines became therapy for his restless mind. Meanwhile, the HOA struggled to regain its footing. Barbara Thompson, once a formidable figure in the neighborhood, found her authority waning. Residents began attending meetings armed with questions and demands, challenging every rule and regulation that seemed unnecessary. Some even circulated petitions to limit the HOA's power, citing Alex's case as proof that change was needed. Barbara tried to fight back, delivering fiery speeches about maintaining order and protecting property values, but her words carried less weight now. People weren't afraid of her anymore. As spring turned to summer, Alex noticed a newfound camaraderie among certain neighbors. They formed small groups, sharing tips on gardening, home repairs, and navigating HOA disputes. One evening, someone left a basket of fresh-baked cookies on Alex's porch with a note that read, "Thank you for standing up for us." Alex smiled as he carried the basket inside, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Still, Alex remained vigilant. He knew better than to assume the battle was truly over. The HOA might regroup, finding new ways to assert its dominance. But if they did, Alex was ready. His reinforced fence, alarm system, and steadfast determination ensured that his home remained impenetrable. More importantly, he carried within him the knowledge that he could face whatever came next, not out of anger, but out of conviction. On quiet evenings, Alex often sat on his back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, and neither was he. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of balance, a harmony between his need for privacy and his role in the community. His red fence stood tall against the sky, a symbol of resilience and independence, and Alex Carter, mechanic and reluctant rebel, finally allowed himself to breathe easy, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, his sanctuary was safe.